We don't know if the Russians are serious about ending the war. They say they are, and under what terms they were willing to do it, and whether we can find terms that are acceptable to Ukraine upon that Russia will always agree.
Ukraine is at a crossroads. Negotiations are moving forward, but trust is fragile, and the toughest questions remain unanswered.
This is a strategic, an economic, and even a military failure. And when I hear some defeating speech about Ukraine, when I hear some leaders urging Ukraine to accept they are defeated, overpricing Russia in this war, this is a huge strategic mistake because this is not a reality.
France warns Russia has been weakened by its own aggression. Strategic initiative lost, economic under pressure. Europe cannot stand by. The continent must step up to support Ukraine and prevent new acts of aggression. Meanwhile, in Washington,
Zelensky's going to have to get moving. Russia wants to make a deal, and Zelensky's going to have to get moving. Otherwise, he's going to miss a great opportunity. He has to move.
The US signals urgency. Kyiv must act fast. Delay could mean lost chances for peace. On the ground, Ukraine strikes back. Starlink's blackouts cripples Russian forces, drones down, armor depots hit, counterattacks underway. The battlefield is changing fast. Is Russia ready for a real deal? Will Ukraine secure strong security guarantees? And can Kyiv turn momentum into lasting advantage on the front? All this in today's report. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has delivered a stark assessment of Russia's intentions in the war against Ukraine, one that sharply contrasts with comments previously made by Donald Trump. Speaking on the sidelines of Munich Security Conference, Rubio said he remains skeptical about Moscow's willingness to bring the war to an end. According to the Secretary of State, Russia may claim it wants peace, but serious doubts remain about the Kremlin's true intentions. At the same time, Rubio confirmed that the United States has imposed additional sanctions targeting Russian oil. Still, he acknowledged that some progress has been made over the course of the war, at least on a technical level. That includes contact between military representatives of Ukraine and Russia.
The good news is that the issues that need to be confronted to end this war have been narrowed. That's the good news. The bad news is they've been narrowed to the hardest questions to answer, and work remains to be done in that front. I hear your point about, well, the answer is we don't know. We don't know if the Russians are serious about ending the war. They say they are, and under what terms they were willing to do it, and whether we can find terms that are acceptable to Ukraine upon that Russia will always agree to. But we're going to continue to test it. In the meantime, everything else continues to happen. The United States has imposed additional sanctions on Russia's oil. In our conversations with India, we've gotten their commitment to stop buying additional Russian oil. Europe has taken its set of steps moving forward. The Pearl program continues, in which American weaponry is being sold for the Ukrainian war effort. So all these things continue. Nothing has stopped in the interim. So there's no buying of time here in that regard. What we can't answer, but we're going to continue to test, is whether there is an outcome that Ukraine can live with and that Russia will accept.
Beyond the war in Ukraine, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio devoted significant attention to relations between the United States and Europe, as well as the role of the United Nations on the global stage. Rubio argued that US involvement was essential to even initiate peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, pointing to the inability of the United Nations to act effectively, a failure he compared to the situation in Gaza. He said the administration of Donald Trump will continue pressure every possible avenue to achieve peace, noting that negotiators have managed to narrow the list of disputed issues on Ukraine, even though the most difficult questions remain unresolved. Turning to Europe, Rubio said that under Trump, the United States may appear blunt and direct, but only because Washington is deeply concerned about its own future and that of Europe. He emphasized that close strategic ties across the Atlantic and reassured allies that the US remains committed to its partnership with Europe. Rubio added that Washington wants a strong Europe, stressing that Europe's fate has never been irrelevant to America's national security.
This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump offered a markedly different view from his Secretary of State Marco Rubio, saying he believes Russia is ready to strike a deal to end the war. According to Trump, it is Ukraine that needs to move faster. Speaking to reporters as he was leaving the White House, the president said that Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky should take steps toward reaching an agreement to end the conflict. The comments came in a response to a question about the possibility of holding elections in Ukraine before the start of summer, with Trump reiterating his view that Moscow wants a deal and the momentum should come from Kyiv.
Zelensky's going to have to get moving. Russia wants to make a deal, and Zelensky's going to have to get moving. Otherwise, he's going to miss a great opportunity. He has to move.
Negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are continuing. Kirill Dmitriev, a special envoy of the Kremlin, is expected to hold talks with the US delegation in Geneva in the near future, according to Russian media. Sources say Dmitriev, who leads Russia's delegation in the Russia-US Economic Working Group, will not take part in the trilateral talks involving Ukraine scheduled for February 17th, 18th. It remains unclear whether his meeting with US officials will take place before or after the main round of negotiations in Geneva. Earlier, the Kremlin announced that Russia's delegation would be led by presidential aide Vladimir Medinsky, despite the fact that Medinsky was not part of Russia's negotiation team during the previous trilateral talks that resumed earlier this year in the United Arab Emirates. The upcoming round of talks between Ukraine, the US and Russia in Geneva on February 17th-18th was first announced by the head of Ukraine's delegation, Rustem Umerov. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has previously said the discussion will include territorial issues. Meanwhile, Ukraine has received positive signals on security guarantees from Washington, with Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha confirming that the US is prepared to move forward with ratifying security guarantees through the Congress.
For us, this is fundamental. We likely already have a draft of bilateral security guarantees, not mere assurances, but legally binding guarantees for the first time in our history. This is the first element: mandatory, legally enforceable security guarantees.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said the United States has made it clear it does not plan to deploy troops on the ground in Ukraine, but is prepared to provide security through other forms of support. At the same time, Sybiha stressed that any future security architecture would still require a US backstop, arguing that a credible and effective security system in Europe is difficult to imagine without American involvement. He added that talks held in Abu Dhabi have brought greater clarity on what those guarantees could look like. According to Sybiha, Ukraine's membership in the European Union should be also viewed as a core element of security guarantees, comparable in a way to NATO's Article 5, while the strongest pillar remains a capable Ukrainian military with robust deterrence, long-range capabilities, and the ability to produce advanced air defense systems. He emphasized that the meaningful progress toward peace is unrealistic without a clear and comprehensive understanding of these security guarantees, describing them as an integral part of any peace process. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron pushed back against pessimistic assessment of Ukraine's position, arguing the war has in fact weakened Russia. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Macron also voiced support for US President Donald Trump and his efforts to pursue a negotiated end to the war.
I fully support President Trump's drive towards a negotiated peace, one that should be just, lasting and robust. And I want to believe that we're getting closer. But as discussions are taking shape, Russia keeps pounding civilians and destroying energy facilities with the obvious aim of freezing Ukrainians into submission. The answer cannot be to cave into Russia's demands, but to increase pressure on Russia instead.
In his remarks, French President Emmanuel Macron sharply criticized Russia, arguing that since launching its full-scale invasion, Moscow has grown weaker, lost strategic momentum, and suffered a significant geopolitical step back. He said the war has undermined Russia's economy and global standing, while Ukraine has strengthened its position by relying on international support and reinforcing its role in Europe's security architecture.
Russia, after invading Ukraine, is a weakened country. It squandered inordinate amounts of money on a senseless war and has now entered recession. It is isolated economically. It is completely dependent on China. While the country already had a severe demographic problem, it lost hundreds of thousands of young lives to an illusion. It meant to fight NATO expansion. Sweden and Finland joined NATO. It meant to weaken Europe. Europe is massively rearming. This is a strategic, an economic, and even a military failure. And when I hear some defeating speech about Ukraine, when I hear some leaders urging Ukraine to accept they are defeated, overpricing Russia in this war, this is a huge strategic mistake because this is not a reality.
French President Emmanuel Macron said any peace settlement must preserve Europe's security, deter Russia from future invasion, and avoid setting a dangerous precedent for the rest of the world. He argued that Europeans must take the lead in supporting Ukraine as part of the coalition of the willing, as partners into innovation to address continental security challenges, and as stakeholders in Ukraine's European future. Strong criticism of Russia was echoed at the Munich Security Conference by German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, who said there are clear signs that Russia will not be able to economically sustain its war against Ukraine over the long term. Pistorius made the remarks in an interview with German broadcaster NTV.
It would be very surprising if Russia could sustain this for very, very long. We must stop the flow of money from gas and oil as quickly, finally, and completely as possible, because this is the source financing this terrible war, the cash Russia needs.
Meanwhile, Europe is still not ready to send troops to Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron stressed that deploying forces now could escalate the conflict and result in a loss of control, so the current priority should be restoring close cooperation with the US to jointly assess the situation, move beyond short-term negotiations, and implement additional sanctions and measures against Russia to increase pressure and help end the war. Unexpectedly, China also highlighted the importance of Europe playing an active role in peace efforts. While not a direct party to the conflict, Beijing wants to support negotiations and called on Europe to engage more directly with Russia rather than remaining on the sidelines, according to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the Munich Security Conference.
Europe should not watch this from the sidelines. Right here in Munich last year, at that time, the United States had started engagement with Russia, and Europe seemed to be left watching from the sidelines. And I said then that since the conflict broke out right here in Europe, Europe has every right to participate in the negotiation in due course. So I said that Europe should not be on the menu, but should be at the table. But now we're seeing that Europe has come up with the courage to talk with Russia. This is good, and we support this.
Good news from the front. Ukrainian forces have launched counteroffensive operations to regain positions along the eastern front line after Russian troops were cut off Starlink terminals, creating significant difficulties for the invaders. This information comes from The Telegraph, citing an American Institute for the Study of War. According to the analysts cited by the outlet, Ukrainian forces are carrying out counteroffensive operations to restore connections between positions along the front line between the southern part of Dobropilla and the northern part of Varvaryevka. Maps from the American Institute of the Study of War show active counterattacks near Ternovate, Dobropilla and Zaliznechne in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, and experts suggest these actions became possible after Russian troops were cut off from Starlink. Earlier, a senior NATO official told BBC that some of Ukraine's battlefield successes in the Zaporizhia region became possible after SpaceX blocked Russian forces from using Starlink terminals. Nearly 19% of Russian units lost communications after Elon Musk's company suspended the service earlier this month following reports that Russian troops were attaching Starlink terminals to long-range drones. Russian military communications were also disrupted by a new restriction on Telegram, a messaging app heavily used for coordinating operations against Ukraine. In addition, Ukraine has intensified strikes on military targets inside Russia, including using Flamingo cruise missiles to hit a major ammunition depot near Volgograd and a missile factory in Tambov. Ukrainian forces also destroyed more than 6,000 drones near Sudzha in the Kursk region, inflicting significant losses on Russian units. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your comments below.